we're going to hold on questions for just a moment. We're going to get them all together here just shortly, and we're going to have a question and answer session. We're going to finish out our talks real quickly. Dr. Paul Locke, who's a member of the Roundtable Committee, is just going to give us a brief synopsis of today's events, and then we're going to call everybody up for the Q&A session. Dr. Locke.
Thank you very much. Actually, my responsibility is only to give a synopsis of this afternoon's events. And that's, I realized when I was listening to the excellent presentation, that's really impossible. So I want to start out with a disclosure is that what I'm going to give you is really going to be on the scale of grading, probably around a C+ if I do my job really well. But I know you listen to all the presentations, and I do promise that I'm not going to take a half an hour to do this, because I think it's important to get the panelists back up here so we can really question them. So let me start by just telling you what I learned this afternoon, which was quite a lot, and try to do this at a 50,000 foot or if you're in the metric system, a 50,000 kilometer level. The first thing I think we all need to see is that the presentations kind of group themselves into different approaches to really setting up and evaluating and then testing performance standards, because this was really all about operationalizing the idea of a performance standard. I think our first two speakers, they did a great job of pointing out how you can really take a very evidence-based approach in setting up hypothesis-driven research to show that a performance standard, quote unquote, works or quote unquote doesn't work. And I think also our last speaker did an excellent job with his case study of showing how that was done. Now, the advantage of that is you kind of get all in one package, the scientific testing, the data, the methodology, and the evaluation, and that's very nice. And as scientists, we're familiar with this. This is how we do our research. I think our next two speakers were faced with different kinds of situations that in many ways are more challenging, where that model couldn't really be applied. I only know enough about wildlife research to parrot what I learned today, but certainly these are relatively unique situations, and they're situations that require an almost experiential and evidence-based approach, very much like, I think, as our third speaker said, a precedent-based system where you are collecting evidence and constantly evaluating the evidence. You have a series of unique situations, and you have to approach each of those situations individually, and you have to ask yourself questions about how you are really going to evaluate those situations and how you're going to be doing that almost on a case-by-case basis. I think that is true both with wildlife research and to some extent with our fourth presentation, which talked about using mostly pigs, because as I heard, it was a pig guy, to study medical interventions. And when you translate from one area to another using, for example, large animals, you've got issues associated with size and occupational safety. Again, it's experiential. It is much more of a unique situation. So those are two different models. And just to emphasize, I think all four speakers pointed out very clearly that the goal is that you need to make sure that the animal welfare is held at the highest standards and that the best science is done. And the goals are in that order, maybe together. And a third goal, but it seemed to be a goal that was really truly a third goal, was how do you be efficient and save resources. I think our last two speakers gave us very interesting views about how the system works or the system doesn't work. I think what I learned is that we can never forget the fact that we are talking here today about performance standards, but we always need to remember that engineering standards are out there too, and that performance standards and engineering standards have different roles, and that it's important to consider them both. I think our third speaker did a very good job of pointing out that performance standards in many ways can be very opaque. And while there's a lot of effort that goes into explaining performance standards and working with them, sometimes within institutions and sometimes a little bit more broadly, perhaps we're not, as a society, really fulfilling the goal of getting everyone to understand how we're doing these performance standard evaluations, how we're measuring them, and perhaps we need to focus a little bit more on that. And I guess the question I was left with is, can we do a better job with that? And I think our last speaker did a nice summary of what it's like when you are at a body that is actually accrediting a whole bunch of different organizations across really the United States and certainly the world, how you really go about thinking about the concept of performance standards. And the burden really is and should be on the IACUCs and the institutions to make sure that the performance standards are measurable and can be evaluated and can be explained. So I think with that, and recognizing that I left out quite a bit, I'd like to turn the podium back over to whoever is moderating this session. I guess the first thing I'll do is ask the speakers to come up. I might be moderating this question and answer session. I did want to point out also, just in the interest of full disclosure, that there was a lot of discussion about the guide for the care and use of laboratory animals. I was a member of that committee. As a committee member, there are several of us here. We're not allowed to tell you which sections we wrote, but I want you to know that if you think about the sections that you liked, I wrote those sections.